Mark woke up to gunfire. A single shot from a small caliber pistol, the quick pop filling the world for 1 second, leaving echo and high-pitched whine as it disappeared. Mark leapt from sleep to stride from whatever unseen danger there was. He felt pavement beneath his feet and others around him also running. Above the gunshot's echo, there was the padding of sneakers on blacktop, the panting of runners, the flapping of numbers tagged to the backs of tank tops. No one else seemed panicked. Mark blinked and wiped the sweat from his face, felt the blood pounding through his veins in his head. His fellow runners kept their heads up and didn't say a word. They were 9 hours into the Great Southern Marathon across the state line from Alabama into Georgia. The starter's pistol had been echoing in his head since at least Columbus. Mark's fight-or-flight instincts released their grip, and he slowed his pace. He rolled from heel to toe, leg to leg, breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. The sky above stretched like a sheet pulled taut over the whole of the world, and all below scurrying at its steadfast and creaseless expanse, washed purple and orange in the marbled dusk. Mark looked up the road and over his shoulder, trying to gauge his pace. Distant figures seemed to run but stay in place, spread out to the point of isolation, each woman and man running their own race now. Mark looked at the sky and tried to remember that he was running, that he should be breathing, that he should be drinking water, that he was in the world and the world was in him, and at the apex of his stride, his left foot hit the pavement sooner than he was expecting, and his body shuddered like the cars of a train slamming into each other one at a time. He hit ground, plowing shoulder first into the blacktop. Mark felt his tendons and muscles give and rip apart, his weight behind him pushing downward, calving his limb from his body. Mark spat tar from his mouth and pushed himself up onto his knees, reaching around his chest and grasping at his empty shoulder. Mark's arm lay on the ground, crooked into a V, his elbow pointing like an arrow down the road. Looking at a piece of himself there, Mark began to shake, his head ticking from side to side. No, 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 no. And then a voice was in his ears, or several voices. Blood like drums pounding through his temples. Go, it said, go. He picked his right arm up by the wrist, threw it over his left shoulder, continued his race. It took a mile or so to find his balance again, with an empty socket on one side and two arms, one attached, the other not, on the other. The countryside scuttled past as he strode there, his loose arm flailing at his back. He tried to ignore it. Self-pity is just a convenient way to avoid thinking of anyone else, Mark reminded himself. Wind whistled past ears, and Mark heard his voice. His voice. His husband, who had always been soft-spoken. With each awkward stride forward, the voice spoke the last words Mark had heard from him. Go. Go. It was all that needed to be done. Go. But the lush green dusk was pierced by a siren somewhere behind him. It got closer, louder, until the ambulance was right on top of him, then zooming past. The siren's pitch dropping as it sped down the road. They were on their way to pick up a fallen runner, no doubt. Mark remembered that his arm had come off only when they were nearly out of sight. He waved his loose arm above his head and said, "Hey!" But they were gone. So Mark just threw the dead weight into the scrub on the roadside, continued his race. Mark's gait adjusted over the following miles, his unburdened shoulder dipping like a boxer swinging for the gut. The constant swaying made it impossible to focus on any one distant point. His view was road and sky and forward and down, so he completely missed the jagged pothole in the road. His left foot slammed into it, expecting to find ground sooner. His toes caught, and Mark was pitched forward into the tarmac again. The world slowed. His foot caught, his leg stretched, his joint strained, and he felt a snapping like a million rubber bands inside his thigh, pulled an inch too far. Then release. He met the road free of his limb. Left palm on the ground, right leg towing for leverage, Mark wobbled and tried to stand. He thought himself a bastard for coming here to destroy himself, but tried to push that away. Rising to his full height, Mark found equilibrium between heel and toe, and, standing still for the first time all day, felt strong and whole. He looked behind him at his leg, the tip of the sneaker still resting in the pothole. Fuck it, he thought. turned on the ball of his foot, crouched down, and hopped. Mark clenched his one fist close to his chest, bounded forward, landing on his heel, rolling, leaving the earth for one moment, returning to the road, his back bending, straightening, like a piston powering dumbly onward. His husband again whispered in his ears, "Go! Go!" The starter pistol echoed, then stopped dead in the air. Crouch. Leap. Go. Mark had been late coming home from work, irritated. He had a whole speech planned about feeling adrift and unfocused and needing to spend a weekend, a day, an hour alone. But by the time he pulled into the driveway, they were already 7 text messages into a fight, and Mark had announced that he was leaving to run this race, and maybe that was a good opportunity, as he had put it, for you to go fuck yourself. Mark's husband bellowed at him to go. The leaving had been easy, freeing, a peel of tires out of the driveway, but in the crush of runners waiting at the starting line, Mark had seen the highway rolling before him as a day-long obstacle between himself and home. He'd seen it as his penance. His feet welcomed every divot in the road as punishment, every stubbed toe, every trip. He drank in like wine, and he imagined his husband in his place, stumbling in the road, casting off a limb, crying for help, refusing to go on. Mark tightened his fist, crouched and leapt, landing on his heel, rolling forward. Breeze bore his sweat away, and his shirt clung cold against his back, pressing there like a pistol muzzle. He strode harder and could not shake the feeling of metal against his skin. Go, he heard in his ears, go. And the pistol pressed harder. Landing, Mark dug his heel into the asphalt and exhaled as he fought momentum. He steadied himself with his fingertips for a beat, remaining still. Mark inhaled and stood. There was a gunshot. Mark clenched at his empty shoulder socket and took the hot sledgehammer blow between his shoulder blades, forcing his chest out, his arms swinging wide. He struggled at once to gasp some air back into his lungs and keep balance even as he pitched forward. Flesh parted at the ankle, sinew split like fault lines opening, tendons shot into his leg like a window shade rolling up. Mark's torso hit ground and, still breathless, inhaled guttural, choking lungfuls of hot air. His eyes clouded like the purple and orange swirling in the sky. When he came to, he could see his other arm, laying about 3 feet farther away from him than it should have been. Go. Mark couldn't. The way was too far, and he had shed too much of himself along the way. Go. His hips and shoulders ached with phantom sensations, reaching, pulling, carrying on. Pressing his cheek to the ground, he opened his eyes and regarded the dim purple sky closing in on the tops of the roadside pines. This had not been penance. The trees reached into dusk with green-laden branches, and Mark rued his disregard. The wind that pebbled his skin with dust swayed the pine tops like a chorus of giants. Night was coming for him, and would have what was left. Go. Mark thought, and put his nose to the ground, opened his mouth, and let his teeth find purchase on the pavement. Go. His neck strained against the grip of the highway. Teeth cracked and bled. Sweat filled his eyes, and Mark inched forward. Each bloody mouthful of highway tasted like home.